Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us today on ClueCon Weekly. Today our guest is Mack Hendricks, and he is here to tell us a little bit about what it is that he does and how he's using FreeSWITCH. So Mack, why don't you give us a little bit of background information on yourself?
Yeah, so I've been in VoIP for a very long time. So I started with a VIC-20. So that was like a lot of years ago. That was the whole Commodore era. So I didn't know I actually loved telecom at the point. It was just I had a modem, and that modem allowed me to connect to the world. And I think that's the thing that kind of got me like addicted to the whole telecom thing. And I really at that point I didn't really understand everything, but
Hmm.
that was the first thing that kind of triggered it.
Yeah, right
So
on.
yeah, yep. But I guess this, the fast forward that. So I had a company that primarily we focused on just break fix, right? So we just this PC repair, and then one day a lady was like, "Hey, we need a phone system," and I was
Mm.
like, "Okay, well I can figure that out." I didn't have any like I didn't know anything about any of the more of the I guess you could say the enterprise class
Hmm.
solutions out there. So I just kind of went out and said, all right, what can I find? First of all, I couldn't afford those solutions, and I couldn't afford the training for those solutions and
Right.
things of that nature. So I figured out what can I do to help this customer out. And at that point, I had just started jumping into Asterix, and it was at that point
Hmm.
it was free PBX, and I downloaded that, and then I was off to the races with open source telephony.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I know you have a little bit of a slideshow presentation you want to show us. So should we get over
Yeah.
into that?
Yeah, and I'll kind of talk through that. That'll be great. So let
That'd
me
be great.
jump into that.
All
Okay.
right.
So a while back in 2017, I started working on this project called dSIPRouter, and it really came from as I talked about my I kind of started off with Asterix and FreePBX, and then I kind of moved into FreeSWITCH, and then I moved into Camilio. And then what I really found is that in working with a lot of companies, because kind of what happened, I kind of grew to a point where I stopped doing break fix of computers, and I started basically doing a whole bunch of support on open source systems. And that put me into a realm where I started working with a lot of other people that were, basically break fix computer people that were trying to get into the telephony space. And that was fine for a long period of time. I mean, people that was a good living for me. But then I started breaking into the carrier space. And a lot of people wanted to become their own carrier. That's what we kind of know as the ITSP market. And when that happened, I found that there was a lot of folks out there that had started building their ITSP by having individual, you know, instances of FreePBX or FreeSWITCH or Fusion PBX. So over time, they have all these systems for each one of their customers. Like they'll have if they had 40 customers, they would have 40 free switch boxes or free PBX boxes or Fusion boxes. And then they're trying to figure out how do I manage those. So what happens is that they find a couple of things on the internet around a SIP proxy, and they usually either find open SIPs or they find Camilio, and when they find those, they try to set them up and kind of configure it, and it becomes overwhelming for them because unlike free switch or asterisk or fusion or any of that stuff, I think those it still kind of encapsulates you away from the underlying SIP concepts. So you're able to get away without really understanding all the details. But when you start jumping into a SIP proxy, being able to route traffic between different boxes, you really need to know the internals. So really what happened was that I found a lot of people that wanted to do this, but just didn't know how, or it was really expensive for them to get into it. So I really started focusing on Camilio, and I said, hey, I can build this for you. So I started building, instances of a Camilio instance. Well, I just started building Camilio instances for a large number of people, and I kept doing the same stuff over and over again. And I wanted to build something that will allow people to be able to basically scale out their VoIP infrastructure without having to basically get a PhD in SIP or a PhD in this SIP proxy. So what dSIPRouter is really a GUI interface for implementing Camilio. And it really focuses on really two use cases: SIP trunking services and PBX hosting. And it's really built on a modern architecture. So the GUI is built on in Python. Obviously, I just talked about Camilio as being the core routing engine, but we made it modular, so we could use open SIPs if we wanted to. And then we have RTP engine to optionally to be able to anchor audio. And then there's a set of bash scripts that are used for the installer. And then we use Nginx to do routing for being able to do provisioning of endpoints. And we actually deliver Nginx as a Docker container inside of dSIPRouter. So what that means is that by leveraging Docker, we can actually add additional components to dSIPRouter by just adding another Docker container. So we've made it really the ability to be able to really be able to add flexibility and add additional modules or components to it fairly easily. So again, why should you care? And here goes I already kind of talked about some of the main reasons I care, but I found also one of the issues was that I didn't find a lot of people that look like me and in my neighborhood, in my community, that kind of understood Camilio. So I wanted to increase the adoption of Camilio inside of those particular communities. So and it's kind of based off the fact of how I learn. I learn by basically looking at other people's code and figuring out other ways to use that code to solve the business problems that my customer has. And that's how I learned, Asterisk by looking at FreePBX. I learned some of FreeSWITCH by looking at how FusionPBX was built. And this is just, to me, another approach. Building dSIPRouter, I kind of use that approach to build it so that other people can learn from the things how we've kind of implemented things, so they can actually, take it, leverage it, and build up on it. And then really as I already kind of talked about, the real main reasons why people should care is that it's just a quick way to deliver basic SIP proxy services to your end customers. So that means that people can customize the GUI, and again, they can leverage it to build other modules if they want to. The design principles here was pretty simple, but these are really key. Really, I wanted to stay true to the Camilio trunk, so really use standard modules. I wanted the ability to start routing traffic between a carrier and an endpoint within 10 minutes. So I wanted something that you can get up and going fairly quickly, and then you can start using without having to learn a lot about it. Right now, the installer takes about 8 to 9 minutes, depending on the speed of the VM that is spinning up on. And then it takes you about a minute and a half to really configure to start routing traffic. We really wanted to focus on minimizing the amount of database interaction during runtime. So we wanted to make things run from memory as much as possible. Another thing we wanted to do is kind of push back on feature overload. If you look at like FreePBX these days, that's probably a good example, is that they have a lot of features in there, and and a lot of those features aren't necessarily something that is core to everybody. So we wanted to be very careful about what features we added, and then we wanted to provide a guided path to configuration. So as we've evolved this product, we've basically started down the route now of like, let's put in some wizards or something that kind of guides people down the happy path and start using it immediately. Again, so the problems we're solving is SIP trunking and PBX hosting, and then a tangent of that, we also added endpoint provisioning as well, and I'll talk about that really quickly. So SIP trunking, we wanted people to be able to create a SIP account really quick, and then allow their customer PBXs to be able to register to them. And the real goal here is just that A lot of people who's getting into ITSP business, they don't, they're not a CLEC, they don't have, they're basically an aggregator. They're going to other upstream carriers. And what we got the feedback from most of these people that were doing this is that they don't want their customer to know who the back end carrier is, because it'll be easier for them to go around them. So they wanted a solution that they could put in play pretty quickly, and that's one of the core, requirements that we had when we were designing this. But we also added a concept of short-term accounts. Short-term accounts is basically where you can actually ask dSIPRouter for a SIP trunking account and specify how long do you want it to live. And if you say you wanted to live for an hour, maybe you want to have a customer or maybe you want to do it for maybe an hour is probably too short. Let's say five hours. Do you want a customer that wants to be able to test out your service? You're trying to win their business. Well, if you ask for an account from dSIPRouter without those requirements, it will generate an account for you automatically, and then it will actually clean the account up after 5 hours or whatever time limit that you specified. And then you got PBX hosting. So this is really where we're allowing basically people to sit dSIPRouter in front of all their PBXs and route traffic to these backend PBXs. And really the core value there is that you really have one IP that you give your devices, and dSIPRouter figures out how to route them to the different Fusion PBX instances or FreeSWITCH instances that you have. And then lastly, the thing that we've kind of added recently, really endpoint provisioning. And this is really the problem, is that if you have multiple FreeSWITCH servers or Fusion servers out there, yes, dSIPRouter for a while has now been solving the first problem of basically proxying SIP traffic. But what do we do with people that need to be able to provision these endpoints? How do you proxy? How do you make it easier for your customer to be able to provision their endpoints? Well, dSIPRouter also can sit in the middle of that and route traffic to the actual PBX that contains the actual provisioning profile for that particular phone. So those are really the three things. So this is again is another picture, kind of represents of the architecture I've shown again. The install, like I said, is around 9 minutes. Quickly, just go through a couple of things with around basically being able to do PBX hosting. The PBX hosting component, there's a couple of features that we have that I think is that makes it really easy to be able to support multiple back-end PBXs. So in this picture here, you're seeing to the left, you have a bunch of user agents, but basically a bunch of SIP clients. To the right of dSIPRouter, you're seeing a bunch of PBXs. So you have a Fusion PBX server that maybe has a couple of domains on it. You have another Fusion PBX server that has domain C on it, and then you have the last one is just a pure FreeSWITCH server that has some domains on it. Really, the key here is that if you look at the very top, you have 999 at domainc.com, which is configured on that user agent. What happens is that is actually that register request and any invites as well is sent to dSIPRouter. dSIPRouter will then route it over to the proper domain. And the way it's doing that from a Fusion perspective is actually going to Fusion on a regular interval and pulling the domains that are available. So dSIPRouter knows about all the domains that are available in all your Fusion PBXs. So if you have 10 Fusion PBX instances, dSIPRouter will go to all those instances and grab the actual domains that's available. So when it gets a routing request, it knows exactly where to route it. For FreeSWITCH, pure FreeSWITCH, you can configure dSIPRouter to actually, you can say, hey, I don't directly know exactly where those particular what domains are on that FreeSWITCH server, but I can tell dSIPRouter that in this case, domain D and domain E are on this particular FreeSWITCH server, and then from there it can route it. So that's kind of domain routing, and it is very beneficial for somebody that has grown their PBX hosting business one box at a time. And then the other thing that I was talking to in the beginning, or in the segment where I was talking about the kind of the three main features, this is the provisioning piece. Um, it's the provisioning piece right now is kind of the same setup we just talked about, but in this case, um, I need to provision my phone, right? And I need to figure out how to do it. Typically, what would happen in that scenario, I would have to go to each one of these systems. Like in this case, if I want to provision my phone, the client will need to know about Fusion PBX one, and or I'll need to know about Fusion PBX two in order to provision the phone. So that means that as a PBX hosting provider, it's a lot of management for you because you got to remember that, okay, this customer is on this box and I have to make sure that they point their phone to this box to do provisioning. Really what we're doing here is really allowing really dSIPRouter to really handle that for you. So all you need to do is give it the IP of dSIPRouter and this URL here and then the MAC address of the phone. That will be what will be in, that will be replaced with what's inside of the phone provisioning. And from there, what would happen is that dSIPRouter would figure out which backend PBX would need to get the request, and then it will provide a provisioning profile for that device. And then the last thing I'll talk about really quickly, and this is really back to SIP trunking, and this is where the API that we added for basically allowing you to get short-term SIP accounts. We call it endpoint leasing. Just like when you lease a car, you have it for a certain period of time, and then actually you have to return it. So it's the same concept. So real quickly for endpoint leasing, the API is very, very simple. You pretty much give it the IP address of dSIPRouter. We have an endpoint that's actually called endpoint, and even the /lease is the actual HTTP URI for it, and you specify the time to live as a actual attribute. So in this case, it will be 600 seconds. So what happens at that point? It actually delivers you a actual SIP account. It gives you the host name of the actual SIP server, and then it delivers you a password and then a username. And the username is typically basically has the format of lease and a number there. And then you could take that and then actually register your endpoint. Now endpoint can be a PBX, it could be a soft phone, whatever you want. But in this case, after a TTL of 600 seconds, it's gonna go away. So after 5 minutes, it's gonna disappear and not work anymore. And if something happens and you need to revoke this lease, there's a revoke API that you can call. And in that case, you're just giving it the lease endpoint and the number of a numeric value, which is the lease ID. In this case, is 7, and then you give it a particular verb of revoke. In this case, and it'll revoke it. So anyway, those are like the couple of things I wanted to talk about. I'm just going to quickly show what our roadmap looks like. Today, we're in August timeframe. Well, right now, actually, we just released the enterprise version of it, which the enterprise version adds some additional features to dSIPRouter that people have been asking us for. Believe it or not, a lot of people have like well, not believe it or not. I think we're on the ClueCon, so I think people believe it. But people are replacing their commercial session border controllers or proxies, and they're looking for something else, open source solution. So we've been taking in requests, and then we finally released the enterprise version of dSIPRouter this a few days ago, actually. But from an open source perspective, we're still on 5.2.3, which was released in August. And really, the goal there was all the things I just talked about is all the features as part of that release. One of probably the main things we released during that time frame was the leasing API that I just talked about. So that was a pretty big thing that we finally released and became GA. So that's it. Those are the things I kind of wanted to talk about, and go from there. So
Thank you so much. So I do actually have just a couple of questions for you if you've got the time.
sure.
So you might have already mentioned it, but how long have you been working on this project?
So it's been since 2017. So it's been, a couple years now.
Okay. Is there a piece that you've found what has been the most challenging for you?
I think the most challenging piece is that I found is that so is that it's demanding, right? So as soon as you put a project out there, there's going to be it, and there's going to be a lot of requests. So really, I think the biggest issue we found is just prioritizing the request to deliver something that people really can get a lot of value out of. And it's been hard because people come with a lot of great ideas. And I think the biggest thing is sometimes just looking back at what our core values were when we created the project and making sure we don't like like go too far away from those core values, which is really easy to do because people are like, oh yeah, maybe we should do this, maybe we should do that, but just staying focused is, I think, is our biggest issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I hear that. Well, thank you so much for coming on today and for presenting all of that information. Is there anything any last things you'd like to leave our audience with today?
Just if you have a chance, go download it. You can go to dSIPRouter.org and you can click download. It'll take you to the page where you can install it and configure it. And we also have AWS marketplace images as well, and the documentation is there. And so so just go to dSIPRouter.org and give us some feedback. What do you think?
Great, great. Well, thank you so much. And I will go ahead and put those links in the description for the video here. And if anybody out there has any questions for Mack, go ahead and leave your questions in the comments boxes down on the video page, and we can get those over to him, and he can help you out further.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming in, and we'll catch you later. Thanks for watching ClueCon Weekly. Don't forget to give this video a like and a subscribe, and while you're at it, make sure to go and follow all of our other social media channels. We'll see you right here next week, same time, same place, and catch you at ClueCon.